We have another fever dream of a title today. Back in the 90s when Diablo released, it was one of a kind in both its scope and game design. It is one of the first games I remember being truly addicted to as a kid, but even the most addictive games grow stale given enough time, and Diablo 2 wouldn't release until after the turn of the millennium. How happy I was when I chanced upon Darkstone, a shameless Diablo clone in pretty well every way. Don't take it as a bad thing though. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery after all. The game had all the ingredients to make for a big hit at the time. The hub town with its cast of characters, rich dungeon crawling excitement, and even a professionally written and composed theme song. Yet, despite all this, the game never really saw great success, and the company that created it ceased operations only a few years later. But why is that? I hope you'll join me in finding out. The year is 1999, and there's a dragon necromancer on the loose. Buckle up. Darkstone was developed by Delphine Software, no relation to the bathwater entrepreneur of internet fame. Looking through the list of titles this developer has under its belt, there aren't any massive successes, but I have just realized they also developed Another World, the platforming puzzle adventure game from the early 90s, and now I want to do a video on that as well. We need a 4-day work week already, so I have more time to live in the past. We don't get paid at all. But, point taken. Darkstone takes place in the land of Uma, and there is a surprising amount of backstory for this fictional universe. The land has been torn in a struggle between the forces of light and darkness, with the goddess Calaba leading the forces of light, and Death himself leading the forces of dark. In this struggle, the goddess Calaba saw the human kingdoms turn on each other in greed and jealousy, causing her to weep in sorrow at the sad state of the world. She used these tears to form the Time Orb, and entrusted it to her Order of Druids, a magic-wielding order dedicated to the cause of life. With the power of the orb, her disciples were able to make the people see the error of their ways, and finally bring peace to the land. In order to prevent the Time Orb from being used for evil, it was split up into 7 pieces, the Tears of Calaba, and disseminated throughout the Order to await reconstruction in a time of need by the prophesized Hero of Pure Heart. Spoiler alert, that's you. Fast forward 1,000 years. Drac, once a disciple of Calaba himself, has betrayed his order and learned the forbidden art of necromancy, and gained power never before touched by men. In his arrogance, he assaulted the very kingdom of the goddess and waged direct war on her. He was repelled by the heavenly goddess of light, but in his attack he was able to quite literally steal her hand. He corrupted it into an artifact of evil, and used it in conjunction with his necromantic powers to steal the form of the now dead Dragon Lord. He uses this form to go and all but destroy the Order of Druids, leaving few to challenge his might as he spread death and destruction across the kingdom. And that's where our adventure into the lands of Uma began. As advertised, this is a Diablo clone. If you've played Diablo, you know what you're in for. We start off with character creation, and have 8 classes to pick from. If you're super unobservant like me, you might miss the monk and priest classes, as you actually have to scroll the selection bar over to find them. While each class has differences, they are more or less broken down into 4 main types, with a male and a female selection for each. A notable accomplishment for such an early ARPG. Even Diablo wouldn't implement male and female class variants until Diablo 3 in 2012. The gender choice is mostly aesthetic, but there are subtle differences. One of note is the Sorceress is the only class that can gain the power of lycanthropy. Outside deciding your playstyle, your class will also determine which skills you can learn. This isn't to be confused with spells. Spells work just like Diablo 1, where you find spell books, and so long as you have a high enough magic stat, you can learn that spell permanently. Alternatively, for those not magically inclined, you have one-time use scrolls. Skills, on the other hand, are completely class-locked and are leveled up by purchasing training in town. There are some skills that are universal, such as faster passive experience gain and bartering, and others locked to a class as you would expect. I played an assassin, so my notable skills were spotting and diffusing traps, theft, and silence. These have varying levels of use. I found disarm and trap detection to be an integral part of keeping me alive with my squishy ranged build, but silence seemed pretty pointless in this sort of game. Stealth is not a mechanic intuitive to a Diablo clone. Theft was sort of a weird skill both to use and in terms of lore. In regards to how it played in the game, you could just spam the skill on friendly NPCs, and sometimes you would get an item. Honestly, even at high level, this skill just had such a high failure rate and low payout, it was really not worth using. From a lore perspective, it raises an interesting dilemma. You're the prophesized, pure-hearted hero of legend. I don't think robbing people blind fits into that narrative. And from an even larger perspective, the class is not some sort of Robin Hood-style benevolent thief. We're literally an assassin, like killing dudes for money assassin. The game manual tries to explain this away, saying assassins learn their skills for survival, and that their great ability to kill from stealth and range comes from killing snakes. Yeah, I'm not buying that we're a snake assassin. The manual actually drills down on this point, saying, having a pure heart is not based on one's past or profession. Even an assassin can have a pure heart. Maybe we're like a fantasy-style Dexter, only killing those that are killers themselves? Let's just go with that. Another new mechanic added to the game is the hunger and food system. Essentially, you have a hunger bar, and letting it go to 0 will cause your character to slowly starve to death. Outside of keeping it full to stay alive, you can also rest to recover health and mana, and you'll need to be fed to do this. It's sort of a puzzling mechanic, as food is so plentiful as to never be in short supply, and further, there is even a spell to magically feed your character. So with a small investment in the magic stat, you can eliminate the mechanic entirely. There are chicken legs in the game though, and if you watched my Shadowgate 64 video, you know how much I like chicken legs. So the mechanic gets my seal of approval. The equipment you find in the game is pretty basic, with none of the really neat, unique, or powerful items like you'd find in Diablo. At most, you might find a piece of equipment that adds a bit of damage or resistances, but nothing game-breaking and nothing particularly lore-relevant. Interestingly enough, you can wear 2 necklaces and 4 rings. I can't think of another game that allows you to bejewel your character so heavily. I'm into it. You can upgrade your weapons for gold, giving them a 1-point damage boost each time. This boost is not limited, but each time you do it, the weapon's overall durability will drop. So it's a balancing act of powering up your weapon without making it too brittle. Spices up the items a little, but I would rather have some more investment in making more interesting items and weapons. The game also features an age system. Time passes as you quest, slowly increasing your character's age. This doesn't have much effect until you hit your 60s, at which point your stats will start to decrease. At 100 years old, you die. The only way of counteracting aging is by finding elixirs of youth, which decrease your age by 5 years. Another mechanic that doesn't really affect the game at all. You age so slowly, I can't imagine hitting anywhere near the stat drop point in a normal playthrough. I started the game at age 20, only found 1 elixir of youth, and ended the game aged 23. Using my massive mathematical prowess, that equals 8 years for 1 playthrough. The game does allow for repeat playthroughs on the same character at different difficulties, similar to Diablo 2. So it could start having an effect multiple runs in, but I would imagine by that point you could just buy all the elixirs you could ever need. Funnily enough, this mechanic isn't really explained at all in the game, so it's possible you could invest a massive amount of time into a character and soft lock yourself at a point where you age out and die before you can find an elixir. Unfortunately, I have no elixirs of youth, so I better get going on this playthrough before we all die of old age. The game starts you off right in town. Talking to the first hapless guard you cross paths with, he offers you a tutorial-style walkthrough of the town. He will introduce you to all the merchants, explaining their services, and even take you to a combat arena where you can learn to fight. It's a pretty in-depth tutorial, if a little ham-fisted. If you've ever played an ARPG before, you can pretty well skip this, as the game is really super simple. Luckily, they didn't make this mandatory to progress. Before leaving town, I recommend having a chat with the musicians in the town square. They'll play you a very cliché, but very catchy song called The Darkstone Will Shine. I sadly can't put it into the video for copyright reasons, but would really recommend you check it out if you've never listened. Fair warning though, I first listened to this song in 1999, and it is still indelibly branded on my mind. Heading out into the wilderness, we get our first taste of the open world that Darkstone offers. The game has a very set gameplay loop. Each section of the wilderness we find will have 2 randomly selected dungeons for us to complete, and each will reward us with 1 shard of the Time Orb, with us requiring 7 shards total. That means 7 dungeons plus the final one. The good news is, each time you play through the game, these dungeons get randomized, so you are likely to get completely new quests on each playthrough, giving the game some good replayability. First up for us, we find a village that is starving for food and they want us to find the Magic Horn of Plenty, an artifact that supposedly provides all the food they could ever need. I mean, we'll do it, but I feel like these guys could, plant some crops or raise some livestock like everyone else. There are like 5 dudes living in this village, and they can't be asked to pick up a shovel and feed themselves. Oh, help me, Mr. Hero. I can't be bothered to help myself. I just want everything provided to me for free. Damn village of sloths. Anyhow, we find the dungeon close by. On the first floor, we find the ghost of someone from the village who had attempted to recover the horn. At least one of them was willing to do some work. He lets us know that the evil Zoram, some sort of wizard, is the one who took the horn. In order to get to Zoram, we need to kill his pet frost and fire elementals and use their cores to construct a cape that grants access to the wizard's lair. Humorously, I spent the first half of this dungeon not realizing you can actually run in this game, making my battle with the ice elemental a game of slowly speed walking away. Entering Zoram's lair, we quickly find that his greatest weakness is knives being thrown directly into his head. We bring the horn back and get our first tear and meet Sebastian, one of the last remaining druids loyal to Caliba. He mostly just lays out our quest, get 6 more crystals, and bring them to him to construct the Time Orb. Moving on, next we find a small camp with a poisoned woman, her brother-in-law, and her child. An incriminating letter in open sight lets us know that the brother-in-law poisoned her because he was jealous of the inheritance his brother left his wife. Kinda rude. Oh, and FYI, this is a recurring theme, by the way. Pretty much everyone in the land of Uma is a self-centered asshat. Hashtag Drac did nothing wrong. Confronting the poisoner, he says he regrets his actions and the poison is magical in nature. He bought it from a nearby wizard. We head over and the wizard says the poison can be cured, but will require filling a cup at the Fountain of Light, which is of course in a nearby dungeon. Pretty straightforward experience. You descend through the dungeon collecting prisms as you go. At the end, you put all the prisms on pedestals and it redirects the light into your cup. This isn't really a puzzle per se, as you just need to place the items and the light auto-directs. More notable than the puzzle is the fact that the dungeon is inhabited by, and I quote, mad ratmen from the hills. That is just A1 enemy design. Anyhow, we take the antidote back to the ailing woman, she's cured, and gives us the next crystal. For some reason, we never actually let her know that her brother-in-law was the one trying to kill her. Like, that might be the nice thing to do, let her know she's traveling the woods with a murderer. Not our job, I guess. We're really fulfilling that pure of heart prophecy. Next quest is a bit more involved. Actually, probably the most complex of the game, believe it or not. We come to a man fishing on the shore of a small island. He lets us know the island is rumored to have treasure, but that any who venture there never return. As a thanks for this information, we steal fish from his basket. Further north of here, we find a decrepit shrine to a long-forgotten god, Eris. He wants us to find him a worshipper so he doesn't disappear into oblivion. This is relevant later. Heading out from there, we find a small settlement. Within, we find a blind monk looking for help to restore his sight, and a carpenter who can help us for the cost of a fish. We hire the carpenter to open a path to the island from earlier, and here we experience our first death. Turns out that fisherman wasn't lying. Going toward the treasure on the island, and we are smote upon the earth. Bummer. Here I learned that death isn't of the permanent variety in Darkstone, but all your gear drops where you died and you need to run back. Sadly in this case, I can't retrieve my gear without getting killed again. I'm forced to start the next dungeon using my karate abilities. Kurt would be proud. The dungeon itself is straightforward. You find different colored eyeballs, put them in their respective statuettes, and then bring those statuettes to the end where there's a puzzle. You have to place each statuette on the corresponding Roman numeral based on a series of riddles. I actually really enjoyed this part. The puzzle hit the sweet spot of making me have to think it through without being so difficult as to make me feel like an idiot. 10 out of 10 for the blind monk statues. Our reward is the Eye of Ra, a gem that cures blindness. We bring it back to the monk and he gifts us a magnifying lens, as he'll no longer be needing it with his vision restored. Worth noting, he says though his vision is restored, his faith is not. If only there were some way to introduce him to a new faith. Anyhow, we can use the magnifying lens to inspect a sign by the exploding island from earlier and find a safe path through. Our reward for all of this is a Bible. We take that Bible to the divine heiress, who inscribes his own religious scripture into it, and tells us to bring it to a follower. Apparently this god needed prompting from us, a mortal assassin, to know that books are great for spreading religious dogma. Do we really want to help the world's least effective deity? I guess he has our crystal, so no choice. Bringing the book to the monk, he immediately joins the faith, and we can return to Eris, who will reward us with our crystal. We are almost immediately ambushed by Drax minions, who seem to be taking notice now that we have a few crystals in our hands. Good thing we're in the shrine to our new god. Nope, seems like he's content to not help us at all. What a lame god. Luckily Drax minions are weak and we make short work of them. Next dungeon is much more straightforward. There's a man outside who wants our help to rescue his wife, but can't do it himself as the dungeon is inhabited by spiders, of which he is deathly afraid. Funnily enough, once inside the dungeon, we find the spiders don't have her, like, in a web or something. She's literally in a jail cell guarded by spiders. The land of Uma is weird. Anyhow, mostly unremarkable dungeon, only notable as at the end Drac pops up to say hello. He gives the usual, "I would kill you myself, but I have better things to do," and disappears. Dude literally assaulted heaven, but won't take 2 seconds to deal with the guy who's assembling the one weapon that can stop him. Nuts. We free Buddy's wife, and back on the surface the two of them are super ungrateful for the help. If you keep talking to them, they reveal themselves as werewolves. We kill them both, and further discover that everyone in Uma is a dick tree. After the completion of this dungeon, we officially have more than half of the crystals we need, and Drac responds by dropping the Darkstone in the middle of town. From a gameplay perspective, this doesn't do much, but it's dark out now. Spooky. We have a few dungeons left, but I found the quality dropped off from here on out. Not sure if I just got unlucky with the randomizer, or the later dungeons just had less meat, but we'll be blasting through these last few very quickly. For our 5th dungeon, we're greeted by a ghost outside stating he just wants to help us. Unsurprisingly, he betrays us. We track him down and take the crystal from him. Short and sweet. 6th dungeon, we collect 3 stones to unlock the crystal shard, each stone coming with a small puzzle or challenge to access. Of note, 1 stone was guarded by this really neat set-piece boss, just this giant worm. Unfortunately, the game design here is a bit underwhelming, as you can just stand at the door and shoot him while he's trapped inside. Lame, but cool design anyway. The last crystal dungeon fully reinforces that everyone in Uma is a bad person. We come across a druid conclave that has turned to the dark side, but one apprentice is outside still fighting the good fight and lets you know his master went inside to try and stop the evil druids. In heroic fashion, we go inside, find the master, but find that he can't be saved. He dies due to his injuries, but we finish up his mission for him. As a thanks, the apprentice says it's our fault his master died and just immediately attacks us. Aren't you a nature-loving druid? Like, not even a second thought, just immediately try to cave in the head of the guy that's helping you. His weakness is having several dozen axes thrown at him. His dying mark on the world is to make me forever cynical and jaded towards the people of Uma. Definitely feeling that pure heart. We take the 7 shards to Sebastian, and he assembles them into a time orb. I use the term orb extremely loosely. I expected some magical fusing to make a nice smooth time orb. Instead, it looks like Buddy just superglued them all together. Piss poor craftsmanship. Sebastian says we'll need to use the orb to stop Drac from healing in the final fight, and he sends us away to conquer the Dragon Necromancer. This final dungeon is sort of funny in its design, in that the outer area is a sort of ornate cathedral, mostly inhabited by vampires and fire elementals, and Drac's inner lair is literally a cave inhabited by spiders and bats. It's such an unremarkable space that I was sort of surprised to just find Drac standing there at the end. Like, it felt so out of place. Usually the big baddie would be in the nice section of the castle, not in the dungeon below. Anyhow, Drac takes the form of a dragon and the fight is on. This is both simultaneously the most thought out boss in the game, and the most poorly designed. The arena pretty well prohibits you from doing much more than trading blows with him, and he hits like an absolute truck. This is compounded by him having 2 endlessly respawning allies, so it's never an even fight. Sadly, as unsatisfying as it sounds, I found the best strategy was to just stand there with my best attack speed buffs and spam a potion every time I was hit. At about 50% HP, you'll want to use the time orb to prevent Drac from healing. Once he hits 0 HP, that's pretty well it. Sebastian tells you to use the astral hand that Drac stole from Caliba to destroy the Darkstone in town. Before heading back to finish things out, you can loot Drac's treasure hoard in the back. Can't be a dragon without a hoard of coins. Back in town, everyone has been turned to stone. Using the astral hand on the obelisk in town should play the ending cinematic. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. Instead, locking the game into a frozen state where the only escape is to Alt F4 out of the program. I was going to save this bit for my final thoughts, but I think I'll talk about it here as it is relevant. This game is wildly unstable on a modern machine. I had issues throughout with things not loading properly, visual bugs, and full out not being able to get the game to launch. As of the time of writing this review, I wanted to get some more footage of the game to use as background while I speak, and I have found the game will now not launch on my PC. I'm gonna touch more on this towards the end of the video, but for now I'll say this is a very anticlimactic ending to the game. I did look up the ending cinematic for your viewing pleasure, and I didn't miss much here, but it's still a bit of a sour note to end things on. Anyhow, on to the reviews. Review number 1. Not a bad game. Actually pretty addicting and can be fun at points. But it does go on for a while without having that much variation in the dungeons. The story doesn't feel particularly well defined, and there's an exploit where you can get infinite money by buying and selling clubs, if I remember properly. I agree with the first 2 sentences. It's not a bad game, and it can be fun. Usually is, as a matter of fact. The next part is where I disagree. I think the most memorable thing about this game is when compared to its inspiration, Diablo 1, is that the game has super unique dungeons. Each one is designed with a single quest in mind. Rather than having a whole dungeon floor with the random quest item in it, each dungeon was focused on completing a specific task. Whether that's retrieving a Horn of Plenty from an evil wizard's lair, fighting against wannabe jailer spiders, or taking out a coven of evil druids, each dungeon sticks out as a distinct experience in my mind. Even in visual design, you had dungeons ranging from sandstone temples, dark caves, castles, and grimy dungeons. Story elements aside, just aesthetically each dungeon felt very unique. In terms of infinite money glitches, I had no idea. But to be honest, if you want to take the time to break the game by becoming some sort of club baron, you do you. Next up. Worth checking out simply for its quirky faux contemporary rock theme song. This is true. The Darkstone Will Shine is an underrated musical masterpiece. It's the main reason this game randomly pops into my head from time to time, and will probably be the main reason that it never leaves. So the question here was why this game didn't have the success of its contemporaries, and I think the answer is fairly obvious. Darkstone on its own merits is a decent experience, and excusing the technical issues of the current Steam version, it's a fun game to pick up and play even today. Problem is, it didn't really do anything of note to expand on the formula. The eating and age mechanics added really nothing of value into the game, and the skill system was generally useless enough that it could have been removed with no one noticing. Sound design was fine, but generally it was generic fantasy type stuff. Nothing really stands out as excellent or memorable outside that bard song you can play in the square. The rest of the gameplay was just watered down Diablo, and despite being 3 years newer, the graphics here were significantly worse than what Diablo offered in 1996. And I think overall, that's sort of what killed this game. It had the hindsight to see what Diablo had done, what worked and what didn't, and it simply failed to create a different enough or compelling enough game to stand out on its own. If you're going to shamelessly make a clone of a game, you need to make your game better or different in some way. And while I do agree Darkstone is a fun and enjoyable experience, it just doesn't stand apart or above from its contemporaries. It was a nice distraction while people waited for Diablo 2 to release, but was quickly forgotten and pushed aside by better titles. Regardless, I will say as a closing remark, this game is absolutely worth a few hours to play through. Even now, I had a great time with my adventures in Uma, but what I will caveat that with is be ready for technical problems, as this game has unfortunately been ported quite poorly into the Steam version. If you do decide to play, don't forget to stock up on chicken legs before heading out. See you in the next video.